finally made it to chapter 5.
Oh, I thought we were on like 15. Just kidding.
It's actually week 17, chapter 5.
Really? We've been going at this for 17 weeks?
Yeah.
I didn't think we were that far.
Yeah.
And we made it to 5?
Yep. So we will read Matthew 5, 1 through 11, but we'll probably only cover the first 4 verses.
That's why. I like that, though. Gives you...
So, we're in Matthew 5, and at the beginning of this is the beginning of Jesus' first of 5 dissertations. You know, when Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, before the children of Israel go into the land, Moses speaks 3 times. He has 3 dissertations in the book of Deuteronomy. 3 times that he's given 2 short speeches, in the middle is a really long speech. And so now we see Jesus kind of doing the same thing. He's given 5 dissertations, and this is the first of the 5. And this is commonly known as the sermon, or the Sermon on the Mount, and the Beatitudes. The first part of the Sermon on the Mount is the Beatitudes, but the whole, I think through chapter 7, is considered the Sermon on the Mount. And it's called Beatitudes. I'm sorry, I think it goes all the way through chapter 7.
5 through 7.
Yep. And so it's called the Beatitudes because the word blessed is being used over and over again. So this is the first time that we see Jesus speaking. Well, we saw him speaking before when he was talking to the enemy he was out in the wilderness. He rebuking Satan, when he was dialoguing with John the Baptist. And then we hear that after he came out of the water and after he was baptized, remember at the end of that chapter it said he was going around and doing miracles and stuff. And so we know that he was talking and teaching, but this is the first time that we hear that it's recorded for us here. And it says he opens his mouth. And this is a Hebraic way of saying he begins to teach. Okay, so when it says he opens his mouth, he's going to say something that we need to hear. And we saw how his first words were said in a very Jewish way of speaking or praying. And this is a pattern that's found in rabbinic literature and in the Old Testament. I don't know of any Orthodox Jewish people myself, but I've heard it said that like when Orthodox Jews become Christian, when they read the Old Testament, to them it flows or the New Testament, it flows just like the Old Testament. And they say, this is very Jewish writing. These writings are very, very Jewish, and so they can relate to them. And another interesting thing, we used to go through traditional Jewish liturgy on the Sabbath. We would read through this prayer book, the Siddur. And this prayer is fashioned after other Jewish prayers, or at least this little part, the Beatitudes. There's one prayer that's called the Baruch She'amar, which means blessed is he who spoke. And it goes on like that, just like the Beatitudes. It says, blessed is he, or how does it say? Blessed
are.
Blessed are the poor, blessed are those.
Okay, blessed are. And then he says, and blessed are you at the very end. And then he has that last verse is a little bit longer. So this traditional Jewish prayer is very similar. I'll read it to you. Blessed is he who spoke and the world came into being. Blessed is he. Blessed is he who maintains creation. Blessed is he who speaks and does. Blessed is he who decrees and fulfills. Blessed is he who has mercy on the earth. Blessed is he who has mercy on the creatures. Blessed is he who gives goodly reward for those who fear him. Blessed is he who lives forever and endures to eternity. Blessed is he who redeems and rescues. Blessed is his name. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, the God, the merciful Father, who is lauded by the mouth of his peoples, praised and glorified by the tongues of his devout ones and his servants, and through the psalms of David, your servant, we shall laud you, Lord our God, with praises and songs. And then it goes on and on. But the idea is that it has that similar structure. Blessed is he, blessed is he, blessed is he, then blessed are you. And so we see the same here, that Jesus is doing this. Now, this isn't to say that all Jewish writings are ancient. And I think that's what they try to make it seem as if all the Jewish writings have come from a long time ago and that Jesus was copying the Jewish writings. This may be just a common way of them speaking. But another interesting thing about this passage is that it may be a chiasm, may be seen as a chiasm. And I don't think
What's that?
a chiasm. Let me see if I. Yeah, I was gonna explain. It's a structure of writing, chiastim. It's a chiastic structure or a chiasm. I didn't bring it. So, in other words, it's a structure that we find throughout the Bible where you have like maybe 5 verses. Okay, you have the 5 verses, and the first and the last verse go together, and then the next 2 sets of verses go together, and then on and on and on, and the center one is like the one that's really being emphasized.
Finding the others.
Yeah. It's kind of like that's the key point, and so it kind of comes in and then it goes out. And yeah, I didn't print that out. I'll do that next week.
Kind of like how limericks have laws and Sudoku. Or not Sudoku. What is the one where you have to have the right amount of syllables?
Like haiku or...
Yeah, haiku.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a theme kind of...
Yeah, and even like the Psalms are poetry. Mm-hmm. They're not poetry in the sense that we have these rhyming structures. Right. And I don't even know how to explain it. I just know that it's not the same kind of poetry as that we think of. Right. It may be themes or something, or maybe even like these chiasms that I'm talking about. That it's the literary structure of the way that they're written that makes them...
it's a formula.
Songs, yeah. So...
What do you think about, there's so much ado about the numbers of what the letters all stand for. They're
as like what the letters.
Yeah. And then of course a lot of people are taking liberty with those numbers coming up with all kinds.
Right. Yeah. Because in Hebrew they don't have numbers. The letters have a numerical value. So the alphabet has numerical value. And
that's
so
gotta be complicated.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Like B's 1, B's 2, C's 3.
Kind of like that, yeah. And then after 5, or then it goes multiples of 10 or something. I don't know, something like that. But there are sections in the Bible where you might find like Yod He Vav He, the 4-letter name of God. I forget where that's at, but it's like every 7th letter is Yod He Vav He. It spells out Yod He Vav He.
That's interesting.
And there's other little patterns like that you can find.
Yeah,
and
before the 2020 election, I heard a few times that certain numbers came out and said Trump.
Right, yeah. They have these little calculator things that they can pretty much say any. You can come up with anything. But I think the things that we do find in there is just another way of God putting His mark, like His watermark or His fingerprint in the Word. It's like it's something that they couldn't have come up with.
Right.
And so it's kind of like the fingerprint of God. It just kind of shows us that He is the author of this, and it is inspired by His Spirit. So yeah, those are some interesting things. But you're right; people can get caught up in all that and get Bible codes and all kinds of. In Hebrew, it's called gematria, where they come up with all these different numbers. They get the name of man, Adam, and then the name of Eve, Hava, and add those together. It's the same amount of the number for the word child or something. So they have all these different little things that really, I don't know, doesn't amount to much. Yeah, they seem meaningful. But it's
Others not.
For inquiring minds.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to look at.
A little project for you.
And okay, I have a note here that we'll talk about the chiasm here in a little bit. So I think I do have it in the paper. So another interesting thing about this opening passage is that before he begins to speak, Jesus sits down. Verse 2. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and began to teach. So did he sit down because he was on top of the mountain looking down on the people? Was he up high? Was he just too tired, needed a rest? Why the notice that he sat down? Things in Scripture, the little details are there for a reason. And so it's good for us to inquire, why did he sit down? This was another cultural norm. It was a common practice in first century Judaism that Matthew is connecting with his audience, because remember, his audience is a Jewish believing community. So when a teacher would teach, he would sit down. And so again, he's sitting down, getting in the posture of teaching, and then he opens his mouth. His disciples or students would gather around him, standing while listening and learning. This practice changed after the destruction of the temple. The students no longer stood for their teachers. Now the teachers stood for the students. So the rabbis saw the evolution of this practice as a loss of respect. It's not a positive change. And I think that probably happened because of the influence of the Greeks. When the Greeks came, they're the ones who brought in the academics and the knowledge and things. And so they probably had a backwards thinking where the teacher stood and the students sat. And that's what we do today. Whereas in the first century, the students stood and the teacher sat.
Wow.
And they would gather around.
I can totally see that.
Interesting.
Kind of like, he sat down. Listen, you better listen now.
Yeah. Go lean over. Let's go hear what he has to say. Mm-hmm. So, worth noting, the rabbinical view of evolution is completely different than that of the Western world. We are taught that in evolution, because I said that, I just mentioned that the evolution of this was a negative thing, right? That it evolved into the teacher standing, the student sitting. So, in the rabbinical view, evolution, things that evolve are a bad thing. We're taught that evolution, things get better and better over time. They become perfected as they evolve. A blob of goo evolves into a living, breathing creature. Unintelligent life evolves into intelligent life. The new is always better than the old. And I think that is our mindset.
Yeah.
Even the mindset of the world, that the newer is better.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that in our society, young people believe that they cannot learn something from their elders, from their parents and grandparents. They are young and have a new way of thinking. They are more evolved. They're more advanced. They have technology. They have smartphones. And old people can't even turn on a computer. Young people are more advanced. The rabbinic view, however, is just the opposite. The rabbis taught that the further away we got from the Garden of Eden, the dumber we were. Each generation loses as they get further and further away from the original source. This is why they have such an emphasis to go back and learn from Moses in the Old Testament and the early Jewish sages, to learn and gain the wisdom that they had. Otherwise, it would be lost. This is why they value and honor and respect their elders, their older generations. And I've heard stories of people saying that they've been on airplanes with like an elderly Hasidic Jew, and he's accompanied by some younger men, and the younger men are just taking care of him. Sit down, let me get your bags, you need some water, and they just go and they just cater. It's not like he's their father. They're just taking care of him. And that's the reason, is because they, in the Hebraic culture, they look at the elderly and say, they have more knowledge. They're older than me, and they have more knowledge, and so they want to pass down that knowledge to the next generation. And as we get further away, we're losing bits. We lose that information.
The way it was here.
Yeah.
Now we all have to listen to Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, exactly.
No kidding.
Yeah.
They're giving the wrong one the voice, man.
Yeah, and you have these children, and there's nothing wrong with children having their place. we become so child-focused that people want to elevate children. You don't want to spank. You don't want to discipline. You just want to allow them to do whatever because, they're just a child. And even in the movies, I point this out to my kids whenever this happens, but you see in the movies, it's like the young kids have all the information, and the parents are, the dads are all, and the moms are, dits, and but the kids, they have all the answers. They got the gadgets, and they got that's not real life. No. That's not real, real world. And so we have to have respect for our elders because they have wisdom.
It's fair to say that's why everything's falling apart.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, the youth doesn't think anything of the generation before them.
Right. And even just the society in general. I mean, we always look at the old cars, and it's like, man, I wish I had an old car with a big chrome bumper. A big steel car. Yeah. Cars back then were nice, but now they're all fiberglass, and they're only going to last so long. And so it's like things aren't being done the way that they used to, because they're cutting corners and trying to make more money. So this is kind of like what we're trying to do as we return to the Old Testament and read in the Old Testament. We're trying to examine the New Testament through a Hebraic understanding to see what the Messiah really thought, so we can apply his teaching to our lives. And so, like some of the comments that you guys have made here is that, you haven't seen the Old Testament in the way that we're going through it right now. And of course, I haven't. I wasn't brought up like this, and it's really mind blowing to be able to connect the Old Testament to the New Testament and to have these answers. Why Jesus is doing these things, and even from the perspective of the first century Jew, what they thought when they were hearing this and read this. So we're trying to correct 2,000 years of teaching that went against teaching the Old Testament. Many of us have to unlearn what we've already been taught, and we have to carefully determine what to keep and what to throw out. See, and again, that's the problem with the Messianic movement, is that they dive too much into the Judaism stuff, and they start adopting Jewish traditions and stuff that just have no purpose for us as Christians. And it just takes them down the wrong path. So we're trying to look way back to the first century to see how Messiah and his followers lived and what they did in order to determine how we should live. Some would say it's irrelevant because our cultures are different and that the times have changed. And sure, they didn't have a lot of our modern technology, but they did have Jesus. They saw how he lived. They walked with him. And there's a lot that we can glean from the scriptures and understand the first century culture. Now, I think I mentioned before, but there are discrepancies. Remember we talked about the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're called the synoptics. At our church, we're going to start going through Luke starting this week. We did an intro last week, but this week we're going to start going through Luke in the way that we're going through Matthew. So I'm not teaching it. My buddy's teaching it. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how he's going to do it. But there are discrepancies with the stories a little bit. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that. But I will say that Luke has a version of the Sermon on the Mount, but it's much shorter. Some say this because Matthew and Luke are recording two different teachings. Matthew's is called the Sermon on the Mount because Yeshua is on a mountain. Luke's is called the Sermon on the Plain because he records Jesus teaching on a level plain. But the teachings are very similar. This could be possible because as a traveling preacher, Jesus may have been giving the same message more than once. Itinerant teachers. I mean, because think about it. If he taught in Tacoma and they didn't have telephone, internet,
he would teach in Seattle.
Yeah, teach in Seattle and say the same thing. Yeah. But we have that today also. There are teachers who go around, and they have the speaking circuit where they go through the different churches, and they're basically giving the same sermon. It might evolve a little bit as they go through the country, but they're kind of doing the same thing.
Look at Billy Graham. I mean, he almost preached the same message for years. Salvation.
Yeah, and in the same way, because it wasn't really... I think some of his stuff was televised, but still, he wants to make sure he's getting it across.
Dating someone for a month for your whole life. The best part.
Right. Okay.
Or like a rock concert. They play the same set, just in a different city.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. When the band tours, they have a certain, they're promoting the new album, right? So they got to play songs from the new album and also the hits from the previous album so people can hear them. But that's what these teachers do. They have a teaching that they go and they, they've got a few of them that they teach. And I'm sure back in Jesus' time, he had certain things that he wanted to get across, and so he knew when and what to teach. Yeah, he was on the teaching circuit.
Wasn't there a Ticketmaster back then? Wow.
1 shekel.
Well, Joseph Prince said today that the only reason why something sinks is because you took your eyes off the Lord.
Yeah.
So I pass on.
Who was that?
What?
Joseph Prince.
Oh, okay.
Today on TV, he said, only time something sinks is when he took his eyes off the Lord.
Did you say stinks?
Sinks. Like when that guy started to go up to the water with him,
Oh,
he
wait.
took his eyes off the Lord.
He said,
Started to sink.
Oh,
Yeah.
sinks. Gotcha.
That's all. He had doubt.
Yeah? Keep your eyes off of them.
So, with the two different accounts of Matthew and Luke, some say they're recording the same event because, like I said, the events in the surrounding verses are similar, but how can they be so different? And it could be because they're writing as they're not writing as journalists or historians. They're not. These aren't historians. There are some early first century historians. One of them is Josephus, and he recorded history for the purpose of recording history, but also he had an agenda, so some of his stuff isn't quite accurate.
what's his agenda?
He was writing for the Romans,
Okay.
and so he had some political reasons why he was writing the things that he did or recorded the way he did.
Who was that?
Josephus. Flavius Josephus. But they were writing to get a point across, the authors of these Gospels. Sometimes they might not even be chronological. And that's what we find in the Bible and in other Jewish writings, old ancient Jewish writings. It's not always chronological. And so detractors, people who try to tell us that the Bible's not real, they'll say, you see, these things aren't accurate. These things aren't chronological. And they'll try to try and tell us this isn't a good document. But in their culture, this was okay. This was normal. They didn't find any problem with this. If you've ever experienced other cultures and been around other people in the way they do things, I mean, it's at one of the churches that we were at, there was like 3 or 4 churches using the one building, and we would have to have meetings every now and then. Well, there was a Colombian church. The pastor and his family were Colombian. It was, they were just Hispanics in general. But the pastor told us at our first meeting when we moved into this church, he says the Colombians are always late. He goes, it's just a cultural thing for them.
They're
late. Because we'd have these meetings where we'd have to organize and plan together who's going to use the building when. And sure enough, they were always like 30 minutes late or so.
Wow.
And it was just kind of how they, how they did it.
Did you wait for them, or did they just miss a half
No,
hour?
they missed, and because we were renting from someone, so we weren't running the meeting. I would just start telling them 30 minutes earlier,
Yeah, and then they'd be there on time.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that. We have a golf buddy like that, and we just tell him the tee time's a half an hour before.
Yeah.
He's always there to retain
Yeah.
time. But it would be a half an hour late.
And, we were just talking about how in some cultures, how did Margaret put it? They don't have a filter. Mm-hmm. Like it sounds like they're yelling at each other.
Right.
When they talk, they're just like real brash and just, but they're not angry. That's just how they talk. Mm-hmm. And
my ancestors, where's this?
That's what I was going to say. That's just Tim belongs to them.
I can be happy, but I'm like,
what culture is that? Tim doesn't know how to just talk normal when he's having a...
It doesn't have to be mad.
Yeah. It's just passionate. Yeah, it's just passionate. Yeah. So, but anyway, our cultures have different ways of doing things, and it's the same with the first century Jewish culture. Like I said, in the way that they wrote these things are not chronological, and sometimes they might not give all the same details. But isn't this what happens today? I'll ask one of my kids about an event that happened, say when we attended service. I'll ask them what they got out of the sermon, and they each give me their own perspective. They'll each tell me what they heard and what they understood, and they each describe what they thought was the most important part. And they're right from their report because they communicated what they individually heard. Mm-hmm. They communicated what they got out of it. Also, each of the gospel writers are speaking to different audiences, so the way that they say things might be different. I will tailor a teaching to the people that I'm talking to. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of normal. I mean, when I used to wear kippah and I used to wear the tassels a lot. I'd wear the tassels more, but I need to get more of the undershirts. But I looked Jewish a lot of the time. People thought I was Jewish. Mm-hmm. Well, they kind of looked at me like, "Are you really Jewish? Because you don't look like a Jew." So and depending on who I would talk to, they would ask me, "Are you Jewish?" And sometimes I'd say yes. Sometimes I'd say, "No, I'm a Christian." It just depended on who I was talking to, just to cut through that to continue with the conversation. But even when I'm speaking, I want whoever I'm talking to understand what it is that I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So now, okay, what am I saying here? Why does Matthew wait until now to give us the teachings of Jesus? He's been teaching, like we mentioned, after he got baptized. He was teaching. This isn't the first time that he taught. His teachings and miracles, his healings, are the reason why he got a huge crowd following him. Because right before this, it says he was out going around and healing people and teaching, and then all of a sudden, all this crowd wants to come and hear him because they've seen and they've heard what he's been doing, and so now they want to come and see him. So here's another Jewish or Hebraic tidbit, and then we'll get into the Beatitudes. In the rabbinic literature, they ask questions in order to answer them, and this is just another method of teaching. The question is asked, why does the it's a passage of scripture called the Shema. It's where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Why does the Shema precede the reading of Deuteronomy 11:13, which begins, "And it shall come to pass if ye hearken to my commandments"? And the answer is, so that one may first accept upon himself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, and afterwards may accept the yoke of the commandments. In other words, when we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one," we are confessing that the Lord is our God. Only after we have confessed that the Lord, as God, can we obey his commandments. So only after we say the Lord is our God can we confess that we're going to follow his commandments. So we must acknowledge the sovereignty of God before we are able to submit to his commandments. Likewise, Matthew was led up to this point in chapters 1 through 4 to demonstrate who Jesus was. Remember, we talked about that. From chapters 1 to chapter 4, we identified who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. He's the son of David. He's the son of Abraham. He's the King of the Jews. He is the one who will baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire. He's the Son of God. Okay, so now we've identified who he is, and after believing who he is and believing what we've heard, now after accepting him and confessing faith in him, now they're ready to hear. Okay?
Is that a lesson for us today?
Yes. I mean, because if we believe Jesus is God, if we believe he is who he says he is, who the Bible says he is, now we need to obey what he says.
Mm-hmm. But we don't need to say that first, No. It's just something that it's just a lesson for us to understand. It's like someone walks up to you and says, show me your ID. Who are you? Mm-hmm. Show me your badge. So once they prove to you who they are, okay, now I'll submit to your authority. And so that's what Matthew is trying to do here.
through the first 4 chapters, he's building this case for who Jesus is, so now the people are ready to hear his lessons and accept them as their own and obey them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have another question for you, a little bit off the subject about Jesus teaching and healing and things. I've always wondered why he would tell some people not to tell anybody after he healed them, or other people he'd tell,
Yeah.
tell themselves to the priests.
Yeah, because they weren't ready. They weren't ready to hear the miracle that he had done. And there's a couple different instances when that happened. Yeah, I don't have the exact answer for you, but yeah, we have to read the whole context in the story to know why, those different
That's
instances.
logical, though, what you just said. I mean, that they.
Yeah, the leaders weren't ready yet, and
Well, but he told some of them to go to the leaders.
Yes.
And present themselves.
Yes.
And other people, he told them not to tell anybody, and then they went out and told anyway.
Right. Yeah, and I think it might have to do. We have to look at the chronology of those events. When did it happen during his ministry? Before his death. When did they take place?
Mm-hmm. I thought I put that on airplane mode.
Okay, so now it's been 33 minutes. So now we've come to the point where now we're going to get into his teachings, and so that's something for us to think about. Do we believe he is God? Do we believe he is King? All those things that we said. And so now we're gonna get into it. Okay, we've already read verses 1 through 11. The opening words of Jesus are sobering. They're weighty, they're penetrating, they address the heart. At the Dead Sea Scroll Conference that we attended several years ago, I learned that 60% of the oral Torah, the writings of the sages, deal with purities and keeping the Sabbath. 60% of the Jewish writings, the Jewish teachings, deal with purities and keeping the Sabbath. And Jesus' first words don't mention any of that.
Wow.
Right.
So it kind of shows you the perspective that he has. Think about that. I mean, the Sabbath, I'm pretty sure the laws that they're talking about are basically, don't do this, you can't do that, you can't do, it's doing things.
Right.
Purity, it's all about wash this, you got to be clean, you got to be. So all of that is outward.
Yeah.
It's cleanliness. It's not working. It's those kinds of things. It's not that these things aren't important. I mean, there are some of these things that are important to God, but Jesus is addressing issues of the heart. Mm-hmm. Our outward actions begin with the change of the heart. Yeah. Okay, so we can't just get, like I've got boards on my deck that I need to replace. I just want to paint over them. I wish that would work, but no, they're getting rotten. If I just paint over it, it's still rotten on the inside. Mm-hmm. So that Jesus wants to go straight to the heart of the matter, literally the heart.
A good analogy.
Yep.
You put lipstick on a cake, so
right. Okay, so the suggested chiastic structure that I mentioned is as follows. Verse 3 is the same as verse 11, or at least they connect. Verse 3 and 11, verse 4 and 10, 5 and 9, 6 and 8, and verse 7 is the central point of this chiastic arrangement. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Can you just say that one more time? Just
verse
that real quick.
3 and 11 are the
we're going
the first and last. Yes. 3 and 11, 4 and 10, 5 and 9, 6 and 8, and 7 is the central point.
Gotcha.
7 is the one that they point to. Right. So the poor in spirit are
Does that mean it's most important?
Yes, it's kind of like that's the one that's being emphasized.
It's the eye of the storm.
The poor in spirit are equivalent to those persecuted as disciples of Jesus. Those who mourn are equivalent to those persecuted for righteousness. The gentle are equivalent to the peacemakers. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are equivalent to the pure in heart. And those who show mercy are the central point that it all points to, being merciful. This chiastic structure suggests that all the characteristics mentioned flow from the central characteristic of mercy. And mercy is the central theme and overall emphasis of Jesus' life and what he taught. He demonstrated and taught mercy. Therefore, there is a need for us to show mercy. Sometimes this is difficult to do. It's hard sometimes to show mercy, you know. Like even today, I was telling you about that guy in that car in front of me. Stinking, and man, I was letting him know too. I'm like going like this. You know, I could have kept my windows up and driven away. I don't know, he had an exhaust problem. It just smelled so bad. And he was going everywhere I was going. I couldn't get away from him.
No, you were going everywhere he was going.
Yeah.
You were behind him. That's funny.
Mercy feels like you're letting them off the hook to me. Like, you didn't quite... I don't know. I mean, everybody wants mercy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of hard to give.
Yep.
You have to have forgiveness before you can.
Yeah, but
really
what if these like people that are out there spare change in hand?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think empathy drives mercy? Is that what it is? You go, oh, I would hate to be in your shoes, so I'm going to cut you some slack.
Well, I think that's part of it, yeah.
And
Except for the grace of God, there go I.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also, like, if you think about maybe a new Christian, you know, I don't know if you've met people who were like totally secular, then they become believers.
Yeah, they still hold on to that.
Yeah, and you gotta have mercy.
Grow. They have to grow.
Yeah, I remember we had a party when we first came into all of this, and Margaret and I wanted to host a Hanukkah party. Never done it before. Didn't have any Christian music, and so we invited people over. We're gonna have a party, and boy, I was playing my Jimi Hendrix and my Doors and rock and roll, and you know, and they came in, and I just looked back, and those few people that came to our party were so merciful.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say anything. They didn't criticize anything, and I just look back and think, man, I had nothing. I had no Christian, thing, you know.
Yeah, the definition says compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm.
So you could be...
So you could hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But you instead give them mercy.
Mercy.
Right.
But did you play your music at the next party as well?
Yeah, no.
If they had sorted you out, you never would have done it again.
Right. And they gave me some CDs later. They gave me some Christian music.
Oh, some Christian music.
Yeah.
That's mercy then.
Yeah, you know, and then it kind of pointed me down the right direction. In fact, I've been playing those old songs here recently that we used to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jimi Hendrix, no?
No. Like
the old worship.
Yeah, there was a compilation CD called I forget the name of it now. Now is the time to worship or something. But it was like some vineyard songs. Have you heard of Passion?
Like a
Hillsong.
Hillsong.
Yeah, the Winds of Worship. Yep.
Hillsong is in big trouble right now. A lot of people are complaining about them.
Oh yeah, mega churches can have problems at times. So, in the first century, the leaders were very rigid. They didn't show mercy, but Jesus did. Jesus came to show mercy to what you're supposed to show mercy for. Mm-hmm. The Jewish leaders were, you're not washing your hands right. You're not eating this correctly. You're not doing, you're not doing things, and they're being rigid about that. Some of the early rabbis also taught and encouraged mercy and humility. It's recorded that one of these prominent leaders was merciful. But what we see Jesus doing is calling out the leaders who put burdens on the people and didn't help them. Even John, remember when the leaders come to get baptized, and he's like, "You brood of vipers, why are you coming out here for baptism?"
Yeah.
And so Jesus does the same thing. He calls them out because they're doing things that the people couldn't do. If they were going to put a burden on the people, they could at least help them out. Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So the yoke he gives us is not something that we're going to say, man, look at what my God is commanding me to do. But that's how the Jewish leaders put it.
It's like that's what they're in control today. Not the Jewish leaders, but I mean, it's like
Inslee and
what they went through.
All the things that we're given. It's like they're power hungry.
Yeah,
and it's like they want to see us writhe around and
Islam.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It would have been scary to be with the Roman oppression. It would have been really a scary life.
Yeah.
You couldn't step the wrong way or say the wrong thing then either.
Right.
It's like it's happening.
Yeah. So Jesus puts a burden on the people too, but not in the same way that the rabbis do. He is more merciful. So mercy is the central point of this chiastic structure. Now let's go to verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So, blessed. So these are called Beatitudes because the word blessed is used over and over again. I mentioned in another teaching that this was more likely the Hebrew word ashrei, which is only used for people and not God. So, this word indicates that God's actions towards the people. So being blessed by God. There's another Hebrew word, Baruch, but that word is used to God. But when the people blessing God, but for God blessing the people, it's the word ashrei.
Word, spirit.
Yeah, I was going to ask the exact same thing. Exactly does that mean?
We'll get to that in just a second here.
Okay.
It's God's blessing on someone who has been obedient to his commandments. That's what this is saying. Blessed are you. God is blessing someone who's been obedient to his commandments, okay? Obedience is equal to blessing, okay? So you're being blessed because you're being obedient. So poor in spirit is obedience. Kingdom of heaven, blessing. Pure in heart, obedience. You shall see God, that's the blessing. Okay? So the point of all the Beatitudes is this. You can count on God's blessing if you are faithfully walking in his ways. So if you're not following God, if you're living contrary to the Bible, and you get angry at God, where are you? Where are my blessings? Well, do you deserve them?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we can't expect blessings if we're not
obedient.
Yeah. And that's what one of the lessons to teach our children. How can you expect to get the privileges of, staying up and watching a movie or playing video games or whatever if you're not doing your chores or schoolwork or whatever? So those are the lessons that we need to pass on. So that way, and what I tell my kids is, you're learning these lessons now as a child, because as an adult, when you get spankings, whether it's from the police for speeding or whether it's from the city for doing something, or that you'll learn from those things, and you won't say, I hate cops. I'm going to rebel. I'm going to, God's doing this to me. I'm going to rebel. That no, we need to be correctable. We need to be teachable. And so that's, it all goes together. What's more, this blessing gives the idea that the person being blessed is in a state of peace with God, and therefore they know that they are under the protection of his divine favor regardless of the present circumstances. When do we feel peace with God? When we are obedient to him. When are we certain of his protection? When we are obedient to him. When we live in sin, there's no peace. When we live in sin, there's no guarantee that we will be protected. These blessings can be expected and realized in our lives today. So, if you've ever felt that way, you're living in sin, there's no peace. Because you can't be for sure that God's going to protect you. It's that guilt. It's that, that guilt will bring that on you.
Walking without an umbrella.
Yeah.
Produces anxiety.
I wonder if you're saved.
What's that?
You're saved. You accepted Jesus, and you're just backsliding a little bit.
There's still consequences for our actions. Yeah, there's still consequences.
And it pumps the brakes on the blessings.
Yeah,
You're
sure.
still saved, but
To get our
we're
attention.
turning the faucet off here.
Yes, to get our attention.
And then back in obedience.
Yep, and that's the
I
purpose
really
of
think
it.
it works like that. Every time I do that, it works like that.
Mm-hmm.
We went through Chronicles and looked at King Manasseh. His father was King Hezekiah. Hezekiah did a bunch of wonderful things, tore down the pagan altars and cleaned out Israel and did a bunch of wonderful things. Then his son comes up, Manasseh. He puts the stuff back up. All the good stuff that his father did, he did worse. He put the things back up. He sacrificed his own children.
Yep.
I mean, he did a horrible, horrible stuff. And then finally God sends him away to Assyria as a captive. And on his way to Assyria, he calls out to God and he repents. And God brings him back and restores him. I mean, just if you look at all the stuff that he did, heinous, horrible. You know, how could anyone ever be restored the stuff that he did? And God restored him back as king. Yeah. And then he did a bunch of wonderful things. And so we know that there was a regenerate change. Something happened because of the way that he changed. Because there was change in his life. Mm-hmm. And so we know that, he was saved.
Born again.
He was born again.
Mercy.
Yeah. God had mercy on him. Mm-hmm. And he got his attention by making him go captive in Assyria. And so that is the key, is our obedience to God. Are we being obedient? Okay, so blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Greek word here for poor literally means poor, economically poor. Physically bankrupt, empty wallet, no money, broke. But those who are poor in spirit are those who recognize that they are spiritually bankrupt. Okay? They have therefore put their faith entirely upon God's mercy. They realize that they cannot make it on their own and that they are powerless in their circumstances. Without God's help, they are not going to make it. Okay, so they can't make it on their own.
So this sounds like somebody that's not saved, but then they realize,
yes,
if you're real God,
yes,
that kind of thing.
Exactly.
They're using
that's
the government now. They're replacing the government.
Yep. And that's
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, all of us could be poor in spirit. I mean, you recognize your own spiritual, like here, recognizing your own spiritual poverty, knowing that I am absolutely nothing.
Yes.
Without God.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
that's why you're a believer.
Need for God.
And that's why you're a Christian, because the unbeliever says, I don't need God.
Yeah.
I got it on my own. But then once he brings them to their knees, then they're like, you know what?
I do need you.
I do need you. I'm broken. So that's basically what it means. It's someone who comes to the end of themselves and they say,
Blessed are, and then
yes, I am poor in spirit. I need him.
And he blesses them.
Yes.
But just the unbelief. Okay, that's why I'm getting confused, because I think all of us can be poor.
Yeah, and if ever we
all have to recognize
yes,
we can't make it without him.
Yes.
Even though we're saved, there has to be a daily recognition.
Exactly. And because if we ever get to the point to where we say, no, I'm good, then now we're back to where we started. So no, it's a daily recognition. It's just that as believers, we understand that. That's why we're humble, we're lowly, we're like, no, I need you, God. Whereas the pagans are like, nope, don't need nobody. And so when they're brought down to a place with us on our knees, that's where they need to be. That's where we need to stay.
So that's what he's saying here is, bless you for recognizing me.
Yes.
And now
you'll be blessed.
Your kingdom is yours.
Yes. So in the chiastic structure, the poor in spirit are equivalent to those persecuted who follow Jesus. We don't know real persecution here in the U.S. I mean, we're uncomfortable right now, but we don't know real persecution. No. I was watching some video interviews with Richard Warmbrand. You know who he is? He's the guy that started the ministry called Voice of the Martyrs. He was imprisoned in Romania by the Russians for 14 years in prison or something. Horrible things done to him. But they were interviewing him about, his experience, and he says, oh, yes, The Russians, they're so generous. They gave us instruments to sing while we were in prison. The chains. And we would hit our chains together and make beautiful music as we sung hymns to God.
Wow.
He says, and they were the best dentists. They just knocked out our teeth and we never had cavities again. It's a different thing. Just his view of the torture and the beating. He would just talk about how they would smile and they'd say, "Why are you happy?" And they hated to see them happy. They had to hurt them. So we don't know real persecution here. When we can go to church without a problem, nobody's trying to stop us or harm us. But the Jews in Israel, they faced persecution from the non-believing Jews. Those that didn't believe in Jesus at the time, they persecuted the others. They had rocks thrown on them, their synagogues. Well, actually, no, this is what I'm talking about here is right now, at least back in the early 2000s when I wrote this, I had articles where Orthodox Jews were finding Jewish Christians and going and throwing rocks at their house.
Wow.
They would tear up Bibles, New Testaments in their yard and stuff, and they would do horrible things to these people, even burn their house. There was one family, a guy sent a bomb, and their 14-year-old son opened it, and it thankfully didn't kill him, but he got a lot of shrapnel thrown at him. And just because they were believers.
And
yeah.
Australia,
Yep.
I mean, it's getting closer by the minute.
Yep. And especially in Muslim countries, Christians are facing persecution there all the time.
Christians are being persecuted in Canada? In Australia?
Well, yeah, they're hauling them off to jail.
Yeah.
Right.
They put the fence around that one church.
Yeah.
And
And
that
they
pastor
arrested the
was
pastor.
just arrested, too.
Oh,
Is
did
it
they
for
arrest
not doing
The masking thing, yeah, COVID stuff.
They wanted to close the church.
I just think it's like 1984. George Orwell.
Yeah.
Everybody read it
Big
again.
time.
You have to. It's so incredibly true.
Isn't it? It's freaky.
Poor William.
So the poor in spirit acquire the kingdom of heaven by putting their full dependence and assurance on God and on Him alone. It's not by their own strength. It's not by their own status or wealth or whatever. It's by God alone and His divine assistance. The poor in spirit receive the present benefits of the kingdom of heaven. They have peace, knowing that they are right before God. He is protecting them, and He brings them comfort. Okay? So in the first beatitude, the first words of Jesus recorded by Matthew, He emphasizes relying upon God and on God alone to gain entrance into the kingdom of heaven. You can enter if you admit your own spiritual poverty and trust in God and God alone. That's obedience. Entering the kingdom, that's the blessing. Okay? So there's blessing, there's obedience and blessing. Putting God first, putting your trust in Him, then you're blessed by entering the kingdom. Okay? So we got 3 more pages. Can we go through 3 more pages?
I've always, the meek too, can you define exactly what you think that means?
Is that one of the ones we're going to cover?
Is that in this?
I mean, I know what the word meek means, but
In this context.
That's
there's a lot of weird meek people.
that's 5.
If meek's the only requirement, you know what I mean? Like meek is, you can be meek and ungodly.
Yeah, that's verse 5.
We'll do that one next week. We only have one more to go through.
Okay.
We're going to go through verse 4.
Yes.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Why those who mourn? Why are they? What are they mourning about? And are they mourning over their sin? No. Are they mourning because they are being persecuted? In Isaiah 61, there is a close parallel to the first 2 Beatitudes and the idea of comforting those who mourn. Okay, and this is Isaiah. Oh, I didn't put the reference down. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord that may be glorified. So mourning is heard in Israel because the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. And this is what will happen to those who accept Jesus as Messiah. Although they walk in righteousness, they'll be persecuted because of their faith in him, because they walk in his ways. They face persecution, some to the point of death, so the righteous will mourn. But the promise of Jesus is that comfort will come to those who mourn. This comfort is an indication that the king is here. Who is the king? Well, Jesus is the king. Who will come? He's the one that will comfort them. He is the comforter. Now, doesn't the scripture say that the Holy Spirit is the comforter? Mm-hmm. The Spirit is another comforter. We see that in John 14, verse 16. I think Jesus says, I will send you another comforter. So he is also one who comforts. Jesus is. So this doesn't mean that we should cause ourselves to mourn. This doesn't mean that we intentionally deprive ourselves in order to bring about mourning. That's not the point. Throughout history, we can see that at some point that some have come to this conclusion and they live lives of depravity. They live in monasteries. They live in seclusion. That's not what it means to be a Christian. To be a Christian doesn't mean that we're sad. Mm-hmm. You know, we see those depictions of Jesus. I love that Jesus of Nazareth movie, but the portrayal of Jesus, like he's always on the verge of tears, it's just like so somber, you know. And that's how we see some of these Catholic monks and stuff. They go out, they deprive themselves of life, of good, yeah. And that's not what God wants. That's not what it's saying. Blessed are those who mourn. The persecution is that of God's people. The mourning is out of persecution. It's not self-inflicted. We're being persecuted just because we're believers. That's why we mourn, because of the way that we're treated. The people mourn because they were persecuted. They were persecuted because of their faith in God. Now that's obedience. Okay, we have faith in God. We're going to get made fun of. We're going to be persecuted. Okay, we're just being obedient. But they will be comforted in the midst of the persecution. That's the blessing. Okay.
I just started another Bible study, and we're doing James, and we just had a verse that says, the persecuted, to count, if you're persecuted, count it all joy.
Right. Right, and that's kind of what it's saying here. That,
I don't get it, I guess.
That we're going to be persecuted, but that just demonstrates that we're being faithful to God. Mm-hmm. If the world isn't bothering us, if the world isn't, if we're not weird, yeah, it's because we fit in with Him.
Mourn and have joy.
Because we have Yeshua, because we have Jesus, because we're born again.
The joy is inside. I mean, the joy is something you have because you know Jesus. Even on your worst day, you still have that.
Even though you're mourning?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm mourning.
Yeah, the joy of the Lord.
But I still have the joy of the Lord inside me.
He's there.
Yeah. And sometimes we have a smile on when we're really feeling bad.
I think it's saying count all joy to you is saying that I'm coming to comfort you, so you can count it joy that you're covered. Mm-hmm. Right? You're going to mourn, but you can consider it joy because I got the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Follow.
Yeah.
And I kind of think, like, when I'm persecuted for my beliefs, or somebody says something nasty, I just always remember that verse when he tells you, remember. They hated me first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
And so I just remember.
Yep.
That's right. And it's going to be expected.
Yeah.
That's true.
Okay, we'll wrap up here with a summary. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who recognize they are spiritually bankrupt and their need for a Savior. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, even now. Blessed are those who mourn because of the persecution they face because of their faith in Jesus. They shall be comforted. by Jesus. That's just another way of kind of explaining it. Mm-hmm. So these are the first two Beatitudes, the first teachings of our Messiah recorded in Matthew. And we can see how Jesus is already introducing some common and important themes that we will see come up again and again in his teachings. Salvation is through faith in him alone, and faith in him will bring about persecution. So those are kind of the first themes that he's bringing up. So next time we'll get into verse 5. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. At least that's what my translation says. Yours.